A double-blind study is one in which neither the participants nor the researchers know who is getting what treatment. Neuroscientist Eduardo Schenberg argues in an open letter that this methodology is essentially slowing down psychedelic research. Watch our interview as we dissect the question, if everyone is blind, how do we know where we're going? Hello, everyone. I'm joined today by neuroscientist, entrepreneur, and president of Instituto Phaneros in Brazil, Eduardo Schenberg. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Nicole. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, you know I'm a huge fan of your Twitter. I love anybody who's smart enough to call out bullshit. So first and foremost.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying my best there.
With almost 20 years of experience researching psychedelics, I'd love to start off by knowing a little bit about what is one of the most promising developments that you've witnessed.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that's happening right now is really seeing these treatments. I always like to call psychedelic-assisted therapy. I think the name encapsulates the thing very well. And seeing these being mainstream and being more accepted and taken seriously these days, it's very, very exciting. This was on the margins, kind of out there for a long, long time.
And this is something that you're working on at the Instituto Phaneros in Brazil, correct?
Yes, that's our main focus. We're now in February launching the first psychedelic-assisted therapy training for Brazilians, doctors, physicians, therapists, psychologists in partnership with MAPS and USONA.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
With all of this research that you have done, and especially the stretch of time that you've done it, what is an area of concern for you?
I think the most interesting point right now is how science, what's the limit of scientific investigation in this topic? So science is for sure one of humanity's most advanced and interesting ways of reasoning and going through, try to understand the world. But science cannot give us all the answers. And a particular point where science is complicated and has limitations is the study of consciousness and this kind of subjective thing. What is it to feel to be a person? How does it feel to be sad or happy or sick or healthy? Science is good to go and measure the brain, but we can't really directly measure our feelings, our emotions, our hallucinations, our visions, our dreams, and so on. And this is a very interesting point where the science of psychedelics get into philosophy and culture and even religion and spirituality. And the mix of all those things is something that's historically very contentious, important, and very interesting and fascinating.
Interesting. So it's almost the study of what it means to be human does need to involve more than just the brain. Who would have thought?
Exactly. And this is one of the main risks right now, is this tendency of the mental health sector to equate mental disorders with brain diseases. And this is a very hot topic in many areas nowadays: philosophy, sociology, and so on, anthropology and medicine as well.
So then would you say that it's a false statement that mental disorders, because you write this in this letter that I'm going to bring up in a moment, but mental disorders are brain diseases cured by scientifically designed medications. That's false.
That's at best, that's partial.
And the rest of it is, you would say, almost leaning more philosophically.
Yes, exactly. So the thing is, how do we look at this? How do we study it? How do we conceptualize what these mental distress and mental disorders are? How are they best treated? And where do they come from? Are they coming from merely changes in the brain? That's the more neurobiological reductionist approach. Or are they intimately related with social connection, family issues, emotional problems, childhood trauma, and so on?
Yes, the tapestry, the complex tapestry of one's life.
Exactly.
You recently wrote a letter asking the question, who is blind in psychedelic research? And I'd love to ask that to you directly. Who is blind in psychedelic research?
I think the blindness in psychedelic research is an epistemological blindness. So it's related to philosophical issues. So then the question is, why do we need double-blind studies? What is the information they give us? Why are they requested and demanded by health authorities? Why are scientists doing this in the last years, let's say 5 to 10 years? And how informative are them? And this is a question that has been understudied, and people were kind of avoiding really confronting the issues. And the main issue here, as revealed in an article by Suresh Muthukumaran from New Zealand last year, that my letter is a commentary on, is that most psychedelic studies, they are being praised for using the double-blind methodology, but people are unblinded because of the very essence and nature of the psychoactive effects of these drugs. People simply, they realize, I took a drug, I'm feeling completely different. I close my eyes and I have visions that I never saw before, and they don't stop. How can anyone get such a drug and does not realize that he was given the drug? And the same thing in the placebo condition. People hear all the stories, they read the news, and they go to the study, and they get a placebo, they feel kind of normal, as usual, and then they realize, I got the placebo, I'm not having the famous visions and so on. So this is the phenomenon of unblinding. People during the study, they go and they unblind and they realize which condition they were assigned to by the researchers, and then the method is not delivering what it's supposed to deliver in terms of data and information.
You wrote a series of questions which touch on this exactly in your letter, and it actually reminds me of a Zen koan, which is this enigmatic riddle, or the Buddhist doctrine of holding two contradictory truths at the same time. And that seems to almost be what you're talking about right now. So I want to read you some of those questions, and I think for our listeners, it's really important to think about this as well, because it does encapsulate what you just said. So is it coherent to strive for pure objectivity if the symptoms of the disorder and the effects of the drugs are mostly subjectively felt? 2, if we expect to find drugs which minimize or eliminate chronic symptoms, including intense fear, anxiety, or sadness, how could patients' feelings change without them becoming consciously aware of it? And finally,
exactly.
If they do not perceive it, thus preserving masking or blinding, wouldn't it actually mean that the drug did also not exert any useful effect? So hearing these questions read back, do you reach any further conclusions about how this might change?
There is a kind of paradox in the situation, right? Because, of course, the double-blind methodology in general medicine is very, very important. So this is not about saying, oh, double-blind studies are not important. This is a useless method in medicine. For example, for vaccines or any kind of medication that you think of, it's a very, very important methodology. But then when we go into psychiatry, which is the medicine of subjectivity, is the medicine of how people feel, then how can people get a drug and improve without feeling differently? Mm-hmm. And if they feel differently, hopefully better, they will unblind at some point. So for all psychiatric drugs, unblinding is an issue more important and difficult than in other areas of medicine, like dermatology or cancer or others, right? And in the case of psychedelics specifically, it's very, very critical. How can people change their consciousness without realizing they were changing their consciousness? One example I can give is like, let's say I want to do a study of how music affects depressed folks' emotions. And then I invite these depressed patients to the lab, and I'm saying, hey, you're going to come here twice, and I'm going to play music in one situation. I'm not going to play music in the other situation, and I'm not going to tell you when I'm playing music and when I'm not, so that you don't know when you're listening to music. It simply doesn't make sense, does it?
It's a fantastic example, and it does illustrate your point. I would love for you to also touch on an area of concern that you brought up regarding the first phase 3 trial with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. You talk about this in your letter, but I would love you to elaborate. What happened in that brought up concerns for you?
That trial is actually my favorite trial. I think it's a wonderful study, remarkable results. It's like decades of work. I'm close to Max. I'm working with them. I'm learning with them. And they were pretty clear. Their writing is from the start. This is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. This is even more psychotherapy than a drug trial. right? And the drug is complementing, is augmenting, is improving the psychotherapy of the thing. And psychotherapy is something that people engage with each other consciously, and they exchange lots of information, of words, of emotions, and so on, right? And these cannot be made double-blind. There is literature about that. Like the double-blind methodology does not really apply for psychotherapy studies. And Matt is trying to deal with all that, right? So the limitation of the paper, as many and most papers actually in psychedelics these days, that they are not really measuring the unblinding rate and they're not reporting it. And we hope this will change from now on. So we hope that future trials will just like measure. So you ask the patients, what do you think you got today, drug or placebo? And then they answer, or drug or placebo, and you ask them how confident they are of their guesses. Oh, I think I got the drug, but I'm not really confident. Or I'm totally sure I received the drug today, right? Then you can report these in the papers, and we can kind of calculate and make all kinds of analysis to understand how this affects the treatment outcomes. Right?
And this is validating the patient's lived experience as well.
Exactly. This is giving patients a voice in their own treatments. And the main thing here is that what happens in the history of medicine is that the modernization of medicine came through these double-blind studies where we get drugs that are active and work kind of independent of what specific people think or feel or believe. But here, we cannot achieve that. If we want a psychedelic therapy really to become mainstream, we need to acknowledge that people's beliefs, emotions, behaviors, and personality are part of the big picture. And the way they engage with their memories, their past traumas, their social relationships is what is being changed during this course of psychotherapy, assisted with the psychedelic drug. And then we can never get a full double-blind study. And the more these treatments work, the more unblinding there will be. And this is what we call beneficial or benign unblinding.
And this would be your top recommendation then for perhaps overcoming some of the unique challenges of psychedelic trials that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, I think part of what we're seeing now is the limitation of the reductionistic, materialistic approach. Like this is not just drugs acting in the brain and correcting any kind of abnormalities. These drugs are modifying people's consciousness, how they feel, what they think, what they believe. They can even change beliefs. There is new research showing that. And these all correlates with treatment outcomes. So in the end, it is a challenge to the mainstream reductionistic drug development paradigm, which is what the FDA and other health authorities adhere to. So we have a huge policy issue because the route to get these drugs to market is founded on philosophical principles that do not really apply to this specific situation.
Almost being so stuck in the way that things have been that there's that difficulty in moving forward and almost relinquishing some of the control necessary for psychedelic psychotherapy to truly do what it could do.
Control is a key word here. When we're saying control, we are also there is a direct thing here. It's like control for different variables and aspects of the treatment, but there is also a control upon the patients, of the doctors upon the patients. Like Foucault once remarked that the history of psychiatry was a monologue about the patients. So usually patients are not given a voice. They are not truly listened to. They're there to answer questions that other people thought for them, right? And this is very complicated, and there is research as well that shows that this can decrease treatment outcomes, not to mention the ethical issues related to this. And this is not new. If we go back to Humphrey Osmond, the psychiatrist who coined the term psychedelic in the 1950s, when double-blind studies arrived in the psychiatric scene, he said, we cannot do this with psychedelics. And he started calling it double dummies.
That sounds aligned with everything I've read about him.
And then we have also the example of Sasha Shulgin, one of the most competent psychedelic chemists to date. And he also suggested that we should try the double conscious approach, which would be an inverse situation. Instead of trying to blind people of what they are getting, what you need to do is explain to them as best as you can what is it that this drug can do to you and how you can, under the influence of this drug, try to change your feelings, your opinions, and your behavior, right? And this is the essence of psychotherapy.
Eduardo, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And the more people that really want to go deep into these issues, I think the better. We really need to debate it and see how we move forward from here, improving the methodology, but also welcoming the philosophical and epistemological discussions.
Groundbreaking coming from a neuroscientist.
Thanks a lot.